Daniel Carter sat in his garage late at night, staring at the small black device in front of him. It was a camera, no bigger than a matchbox, but it weighed heavily on his mind. His fingers traced its edges as he thought about what he was planning to do. Outside, the wind howled softly, rustling the leaves that had fallen onto the driveway. Inside, the air felt thick, almost suffocating. The only sound was the faint ticking of an old clock hanging on the wall. It had been 2 weeks since Ethan, his son, died. 2 long, agonizing weeks. Daniel couldn't stop thinking about him, his smile, his laugh, the way he used to call out Dad when he came home from school. But now, all that remained were memories. Memories in a coffin buried 6 feet under the cold earth. Ethan had been driving back from a friend's house when the accident happened. A drunk driver crossed the center line and hit him head-on. By the time the paramedics arrived, it was too late. Daniel remembered the phone call like it was yesterday, the officer's voice cracking with sympathy as he delivered the news. Daniel had dropped the phone then, falling to his knees as if struck by lightning. Even now, just thinking about it, made his chest tighten. Laura, his ex-wife, had tried to comfort him after the funeral. She told him to focus on happy memories, to let go of the pain. But letting go wasn't easy. Not for Daniel. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Ethan lying motionless in the hospital bed, machines beeping around him. He heard the doctor's words, "I'm sorry, Mr. Carter, we did everything we could." But Daniel couldn't accept it. How could someone so full of life simply vanish? Where did Ethan go after death? Was there really nothing left behind? These questions haunted him day and night. They gnawed at his soul until he decided he needed answers, even if those answers came from places most people wouldn't dare to look. That's when the idea struck him. What if he installed a camera inside Ethan's coffin? It sounded crazy even to himself. Burial sites weren't exactly known for activity. Still, the thought lingered. If there was any chance of capturing something, anything, it might help him find some peace. Or maybe it would prove once and for all that death was truly the end. The more Daniel thought about it, the more determined he became. He spent hours researching tiny cameras online, finally settling on one designed for extreme conditions. Waterproof, shockproof, and capable of recording continuously for days. He ordered it immediately, ignoring the nagging voice in his head, telling him this was wrong. When the package arrived, Daniel locked himself in the garage to set it up. He tested the camera repeatedly, making sure it worked perfectly. Then, he wrapped it carefully in plastic to protect it from moisture and dirt. Each step brought him closer to the moment of truth, but also deeper into a pit of guilt. Was he desecrating Ethan's final resting place? Would Laura hate him if she found out? These doubts swirled in his mind, but he pushed them aside. This wasn't about anyone else. It was about finding closure for himself. On the morning of the funeral, Daniel woke up early. He dressed slowly, choosing a dark suit that felt stiff and unfamiliar against his skin. As he stood in front of the mirror, tying his tie, he caught a glimpse of his reflection. The man staring back looked older than he remembered. His eyes were sunken, surrounded by dark circles. Stress lines etched deep into his forehead. For the first time, he realized how much weight he'd lost since Ethan's passing. The service itself passed in a blur. Friends and family gathered at the church, offering condolences and sharing stories about Ethan. Some cried openly. Others wore masks of stoic strength. Daniel listened quietly, nodding occasionally, though none of it registered fully. All he could think about was the camera tucked safely in his pocket, waiting to fulfill its purpose. After the ceremony, everyone moved to the cemetery. The sky was overcast, threatening rain. Daniel stood beside Laura as the pallbearers carried the coffin to the gravesite. His heart pounded in his chest as they lowered it into the ground. This was it, the moment he'd been dreading and anticipating all at once. As the crowd dispersed, Daniel lingered behind. He waited until the gravediggers began shoveling dirt over the coffin before slipping away unnoticed. Once he was sure no one was watching, he approached the grave. Kneeling down, he reached into his pocket and retrieved the camera. With trembling hands, he slid it through a narrow gap between the coffin lid and the lining. He whispered a silent apology to Ethan, hoping wherever his son was he'd understand. Standing up, Daniel took one last look at the freshly dug grave. Tears streamed down his face, blurring his vision. He wanted to scream, to collapse right there on the grass, but instead he turned and walked away, leaving behind not just Ethan's body but a piece of his own sanity. Back home, Daniel poured himself a glass of whiskey and sat in his recliner. He stared blankly at the TV, though it wasn't turned on. His thoughts raced uncontrollably. Had he done the right thing? Would the camera even work? And if it did, what would he see? Days passed and Daniel avoided going near the laptop where the footage would eventually be stored. He told himself he needed time to prepare, to build up the courage to face whatever awaited him. But deep down, he knew the real reason. He was afraid of what he might find, afraid of what it would mean. One evening, unable to bear the suspense any longer, Daniel finally decided to check the video. He grabbed a flashlight and headed to the garage, his footsteps echoing in the silence. The air smelled of gasoline and damp wood, familiar scents that usually calmed him. Tonight, however, they only added to his unease. He connected the camera to his laptop and opened the file. At first, the screen showed nothing but darkness. Static flickered briefly before stabilizing into a grainy image of the coffin's interior. Daniel leaned closer, squinting at the screen. For several minutes, nothing happened. Just the faint outline of satin lining and the occasional glint of metal screws holding the lid in place. Then something moved. Daniel froze, his breath catching in his throat. He rewound the clip and played it again. There it was, a subtle shift, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. Something or someone was moving inside the coffin. Daniel Carter sat frozen in his garage, his eyes glued to the laptop screen. His heart pounded so loudly he could hear it in his ears. On the screen was the grainy footage from the camera inside Ethan's coffin. At first glance, everything seemed still, just the satin lining of the coffin and shadows cast by the tiny device. But then came the movement again. It wasn't much, just a slight shift near the edge of the frame, but it was enough to send chills down Daniel's spine. He rewound the video and played it back several times, each time looking for something he might have missed. Was it interference, a glitch in the camera, or was it something else? The thought made his stomach twist into knots. He tried to rationalize what he was seeing. Maybe the soil above the coffin had shifted slightly due to settling or rainwater seeping through. But deep down, he knew that didn't explain the deliberate way the movement appeared. Daniel leaned back in his chair, running his hands over his face. His mind raced with possibilities, none of them comforting. Could Ethan have been buried alive? No, that couldn't be possible. He remembered clearly how the doctors pronounced him dead at the hospital. There was no heartbeat, no breathing. They wouldn't make such a mistake, would they? But if not that, then what? What could cause this kind of movement inside a sealed coffin? Daniel felt a cold sweat break out across his forehead. He glanced around the garage as if expecting someone, or something, to appear behind him. The silence pressed against his ears, broken only by the faint hum of the laptop fan. Unable to shake off the unease, Daniel decided to fast forward through the footage. Hours passed in seconds on the screen, yet nothing significant changed, just the same dark, motionless interior of the coffin. Then suddenly, about 12 hours into the recording, something extraordinary happened. The lid of the coffin shifted. It wasn't dramatic, a fraction of an inch at most, but it was unmistakable. Something had pushed against it from the inside. Daniel gasped, nearly knocking over the laptop in his shock. He replayed the clip multiple times, zooming in as far as the resolution allowed. The movement was subtle but undeniable. Whatever or whoever was inside the coffin had interacted with its surroundings. Panic bubbled up inside Daniel. He wanted to believe it was some natural phenomenon, like pressure from the earth above causing the wood to warp. But the rational part of his brain rejected that idea. Coffins were designed to withstand external forces, especially modern ones like Ethan's. Besides, the movement looked intentional, not random. His thoughts spiraled further. If Ethan wasn't dead, why hadn't he called out sooner? Why hadn't anyone heard him struggling during the funeral? And even if he had somehow survived the crash, how could he possibly endure being trapped underground for days without air or water? None of it added up. Desperate for answers, Daniel turned to the internet. He scoured forums and articles about similar cases, hoping to find explanations. Most stories were hoaxes or urban legends, but one caught his attention. It described a man who claimed his deceased brother's coffin showed signs of tampering after burial. According to the post, the family exhumed the body only to find the casket empty, with strange symbols carved into the lining. Daniel dismissed it at first as nonsense, but the parallels were too striking to ignore. Could the same thing have happened to Ethan? The thought sent shivers crawling up his arms. He needed help. Someone who could look at this objectively and provide clarity. Someone smarter than him. The next morning, Daniel visited Dr. Rachel Meyer, a local physicist known for her work in quantum mechanics. She was a tall woman in her late 40s with curly brown hair and glasses perched on the bridge of her nose. Her office smelled faintly of coffee and old books, and shelves lined with scientific journals covered every wall. Daniel hesitated before speaking. "Dr. Meyer," he began, "I need your help with something unusual." She raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Unusual is my specialty. What do you have?" Taking a deep breath, Daniel explained everything, from Ethan's death to the camera, in the coffin, and the mysterious movements captured on film. He pulled out his laptop and showed her the footage. Rachel watched silently, her expression unreadable. When the clip ended, she leaned back in her chair, tapping her pen against her chin. "This is fascinating," she said finally, "and deeply unsettling." "You think I'm crazy, don't you?" Daniel asked, bracing himself for skepticism. "No," Rachel replied firmly. "I think you're onto something. But we need to rule out natural causes first. Let's analyze the data more thoroughly." Over the next few days, Daniel worked closely with Rachel to examine the footage. They enhanced the video quality, isolated individual frames, and compared them to environmental factors like temperature and soil composition. Despite their efforts, they couldn't attribute the movement to anything logical. Frustrated but determined, Daniel suggested digging up Ethan's grave. Rachel agreed reluctantly, warning him that disturbing a burial site could attract unwanted attention. Together, they hired a private crew under the guise of relocating the remains to a family plot. Daniel waited anxiously as the workers dug into the earth, his nerves fraying with each passing moment. When they finally opened the coffin, everyone fell silent. The casket was empty. Inside, scrawled across the satin lining in shaky handwriting, were 3 chilling words. "They're here." Daniel stared at the message, his blood turning to ice. Who or what were they? And where was Ethan? Rachel examined the writing carefully, noting its uneven strokes. "This wasn't done by human hands," she murmured. "At least not recently." "What does that mean?" Daniel demanded, his voice trembling. "It means—" Rachel paused, choosing her words carefully. "Whatever happened to Ethan may not follow our understanding of reality." That night, Daniel returned home feeling more confused and terrified than ever. He locked himself in the garage once again, staring at the blank screen of his laptop. The weight of what he'd uncovered pressed heavily on his shoulders. Somewhere between grief and desperation, he realized this was no longer about finding closure. This was about uncovering a truth that defied explanation, a truth that could change everything. As he sat there alone, the wind picked up outside, rattling the windows. For the first time, Daniel wondered if looking for answers had been a mistake, but it was too late to turn back now. After discovering Ethan's empty coffin and the cryptic message scrawled inside it, Daniel felt like his world had been turned upside down. His mind raced with questions. each more unsettling than the last. Who, or what, had taken Ethan? What did the words "they're here" mean? And most importantly, where was his son now? Desperate for answers, Daniel returned to Dr. Rachel Meyer. She listened quietly as he recounted everything that had happened during the exhumation. Her expression remained calm, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. "This goes beyond anything I've ever encountered," she admitted. "We need someone who might have seen something similar before." Rachel suggested they visit Harold Jenkins, a retired professor of metaphysics who lived on the outskirts of town. According to her, Harold had spent decades studying phenomena that defied conventional science. Though skeptical at first, Daniel agreed to go along with the idea. At this point, he was willing to try anything. The drive to Harold's house took them through winding country roads lined with tall trees. As they pulled into the driveway, Daniel noticed how isolated the place was. The house itself looked ancient, its paint peeling and windows clouded with grime. A rusted mailbox leaned precariously at the entrance, bearing the name Jenkins in faded letters. When they knocked on the door, it creaked open slowly, revealing an elderly man with wispy white hair and sharp blue eyes. Harold greeted them warmly, inviting them inside without hesitation. His home was cluttered with books, papers, and strange artifacts, crystals, pendulums, and maps marked with symbols Daniel didn't recognize. Once seated in the living room, Daniel explained their situation, showing Harold the footage from the camera and describing the discovery of the empty coffin. Harold listened carefully, his gaze fixed on the screen as if searching for something hidden within the grainy images. When Daniel finished speaking, Harold leaned back in his chair, stroking his chin thoughtfully. "I've heard stories like yours before," he said finally. "Not many people believe them, but they're out there." "What kind of stories?" Daniel asked, leaning forward eagerly. Harold hesitated before answering. "There are entities, beings that exist in places we can't see or understand. Some call them spirits. Others refer to them as interdimensional travelers. They aren't bound by our rules of time or space. Occasionally they interact with our world, not always intentionally." Daniel's heart sank. "Are you saying my son is one of them?" "No," Harold replied firmly. "Ethan is still Ethan, but he may be caught somewhere in between. Neither fully alive nor dead. It's called a liminal state. People who experience it often describe feeling trapped, unable to move forward or return." Rachel frowned. "How does someone end up in such a state?" "It happens when certain conditions align," Harold explained. "Some individuals possess unique frequencies, energies, that make them visible to these entities. When they die, their presence lingers, attracting attention from beings on the other side." "So you're saying Ethan attracted these things?" Daniel asked, struggling to process what he was hearing. "Possibly," Harold nodded. "But it's not necessarily bad. These entities aren't inherently evil. They're curious. Sometimes they take those who are different to learn about our world. Other times they leave messages like the one you found." Daniel felt a mix of hope and dread. If Harold was right, then Ethan might still be out there, alive in some form. But how could they bring him back? "What do we do now?" Daniel asked, his voice trembling. Harold sighed. "If you want to reach Ethan, you'll need to recreate the conditions that allowed these entities access in the first place. It's risky, though. Bridging dimensions isn't something humans were meant to meddle with." Despite the warning, Daniel knew he had no choice. He couldn't give up on his son. Not yet. Over the next few days, Harold guided Daniel and Rachel in building a device designed to amplify electromagnetic frequencies. According to Harold, these frequencies acted as a bridge between worlds, allowing communication, or even interaction, with entities from other realms. The process was slow and painstaking. They gathered materials from hardware stores and scavenged parts from old electronics. Daniel worked tirelessly in his garage, piecing together wires, circuits, and antennas under Harold's watchful eye. Rachel handled the calculations, ensuring the machine would function properly without causing harm. As they worked, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Shadows seemed to shift just outside his peripheral vision, and, Faint whispers echoed in the corners of the room. He tried to convince himself it was just his imagination, but the sensation grew stronger with each passing day. Finally, after weeks of effort, the device was ready. It resembled a large metal contraption with blinking lights and rotating antennae. Harold warned them to use it only at Ethan's gravesite, where the original connection had occurred. On the chosen night, Daniel, Rachel, and Harold drove to the cemetery under the cover of darkness. The air was cold and heavy, carrying the scent of damp earth. Stars twinkled faintly above, casting a pale glow over the rows of headstones. They set up the device near Ethan's grave, positioning it carefully to maximize its range. Daniel's hands shook as he powered it on, the hum of electricity filling the silence. The machine began to whir softly, its lights pulsing in rhythm with the energy it emitted. At first, nothing happened. Then the ground beneath them trembled slightly, sending shockwaves through the soles of their shoes. A low hum filled the air, growing louder until it vibrated in their chests. Daniel clenched his fists, fighting the urge to run. Suddenly, a figure materialized before them, a translucent shape glowing faintly blue. It took a moment for Daniel to realize it was Ethan. Tears streamed down Daniel's face as he stared at his son. Ethan looked different, not quite solid, but unmistakably himself. His lips moved, forming words layered with echoes. "They're not bad," Ethan said, his voice resonating strangely. "They're just curious. They wanted to know about us, about life." "Where are you?" Daniel choked out. "Can you come back?" Ethan shook his head sadly. "I'm stuck between. I can't stay here forever. But Dad, listen. They're everywhere, watching, learning. We're not alone." Before Daniel could respond, Ethan began to fade, his form dissolving into shimmering particles that drifted upward like smoke. Within seconds, he was gone. The machine sputtered and died, plunging them back into silence. Daniel collapsed to his knees, overwhelmed by emotion. For the first time since Ethan's death, he felt a glimmer of peace, but also a profound sense of awe. Harold placed a comforting hand on Daniel's shoulder. "You did good," he said softly. "Now it's up to the rest of the world to decide what to do with this knowledge." As dawn broke over the horizon, Daniel knew their lives and perhaps humanity's understanding of existence would never be the same again. The morning after Ethan's appearance at the gravesite, Daniel woke up feeling both drained and restless. His mind replayed every detail of the encounter, the way Ethan had looked, his voice layered with echoes, and the cryptic message he'd delivered. "We're not alone." It was overwhelming to think about, but Daniel couldn't ignore what he'd seen. Something extraordinary had happened, and now it was up to him to figure out what it meant. He called Rachel early that day, asking her to meet him in the garage. When she arrived, she found him already hard at work, poring over notes and diagrams spread across the table. The room smelled of burnt coffee and ozone from the makeshift machine they'd used the night before. "What now?" Rachel asked as she pulled up a chair beside him. Her tone was calm, but her eyes betrayed her unease. "We share it," Daniel replied without hesitation. "Ethan showed us something incredible. If we keep this to ourselves, no one will ever know." Rachel hesitated. "You realize how insane this sounds, right? People aren't going to believe us. They'll call us crazy or say we faked everything." "I don't care," Daniel said firmly. "This isn't just about me anymore. Ethan told us there are beings out there watching us, learning about us. That changes everything. We owe it to the world to let them decide for themselves." Rachel sighed but nodded reluctantly. She knew Daniel was right, even if sharing their discovery came with risks. Together they began reviewing the footage from the cemetery, enhancing the video quality and isolating frames where Ethan's translucent form appeared most clearly. They also documented Harold Jenkins' theories about interdimensional entities and liminal states, adding context to support their claims. By the end of the week, they had compiled enough evidence to create a short video presentation. Daniel narrated the story himself, explaining his grief, the camera in the coffin, the empty grave, and finally Ethan's reappearance. He ended with a plea for humanity to consider the possibility that life, and perhaps consciousness, extends far beyond what science currently understands. Once the video was complete, Daniel uploaded it to the internet under a pseudonym. He chose a simple title: "What happened after my son died will change everything." Within hours, the video went viral. At first, reactions were mixed. Some viewers dismissed it as a hoax, pointing out inconsistencies in the footage or claiming Daniel had used special effects to fake Ethan's appearance. Others accused him of exploiting his son's death for attention. But amid the skepticism, there were also voices of curiosity and wonder. People shared personal stories of near-death experiences, unexplained phenomena, and encounters with the unknown. Scientists debated whether the electromagnetic device could truly bridge dimensions, while conspiracy theorists speculated about government cover-ups involving alien contact. As the days passed, the controversy only grew. News outlets picked up the story, interviewing experts and skeptics alike. Governments issued statements urging caution, warning citizens not to attempt replicating Daniel's experiment due to potential dangers. Meanwhile, researchers around the globe scrambled to analyze the data, hoping to validate or debunk the claims. For Daniel, the sudden spotlight was overwhelming. Reporters camped outside his house, demanding interviews. Strangers sent letters and emails, some offering condolences, others accusing him of lying. Laura, his ex-wife, called him in tears, furious that he had dragged Ethan into such chaos. Even Harold Jenkins distanced himself publicly, fearing backlash from the scientific community. Despite the pressure, Daniel refused to back down. He gave a single televised interview, speaking directly to the camera with raw honesty. "I didn't do this for fame or money," he said, his voice steady despite the weight of emotion behind it. "I did it because my son showed me something amazing. Whether you believe me or not, I hope you'll at least consider the possibility that we're part of something bigger than ourselves." His words resonated deeply with many people. Online forums dedicated to discussing the video sprang up overnight, attracting millions of users. Some groups attempted to recreate Daniel's experiment, posting their own findings online. Most failed, but a handful reported bizarre results: flickering lights, strange noises, and fleeting glimpses of figures that vanished as quickly as they appeared. Amid the chaos, Rachel continued working tirelessly to make sense of the data. She collaborated with physicists, neuroscientists, and even philosophers, exploring connections between quantum mechanics, consciousness, and the paranormal. Slowly but surely, patterns began to emerge. Certain frequencies seemed to correlate, with increased reports of unusual activity, suggesting that Daniel's device might have tapped into something real. One evening, as she sifted through research papers, Rachel stumbled upon an article written decades ago by Harold Jenkins. Titled "The Threshold Hypothesis," it proposed that certain individuals possessed unique brainwave patterns capable of interacting with parallel dimensions. Though largely ignored at the time, the theory aligned eerily well with what they'd witnessed. Excited, Rachel rushed to Daniel's garage to show him the paper. "This could explain why Ethan attracted these entities," she said, pointing to a graph illustrating the concept. If his frequency matched theirs, it would have been like opening a door. Daniel studied the graph, his brow furrowed in thought. "So you're saying Ethan wasn't random, that he was chosen because of who he was?" "It's possible," Rachel admitted. "But if that's true, then maybe others like him exist too. Maybe we're closer to understanding this than we thought." Inspired by the discovery, Daniel decided to take things further. He reached out to families who claimed to have experienced similar phenomena, inviting them to share their stories. One by one, they came forward, some hesitant, others eager to contribute. Each account added another piece to the puzzle, painting a picture of a hidden reality that intersected with our own in ways no one had imagined. As weeks turned into months, public opinion began to shift. What started as skepticism gave way to cautious curiosity. Scientists launched new studies, governments allocated funding for advanced research, and ordinary people started paying closer attention to the mysteries around them. For the first time in history, humanity collectively faced the question, are we truly alone? For Daniel, the journey was far from over. Though he missed Ethan more than ever, he found solace in knowing his son's message had sparked a global awakening. As he sat in his garage late one night, staring at the glowing screens filled with data and theories, he allowed himself a small smile. Ethan had shown him something incredible. Not just proof of life beyond death, but a glimpse of infinite possibilities. And though the road ahead promised challenges, Daniel knew one thing for certain: the search for truth was worth every step. Months had passed since Daniel Carter shared his story with the world, and life as he knew it had changed forever. The video of Ethan's reappearance became one of the most talked about events in modern history. It sparked debates, inspired research, and even led to new scientific discoveries. But for Daniel, the whirlwind of attention brought both relief and exhaustion. While he was grateful for the progress being made, he couldn't shake the feeling that humanity still had so much more to learn. The global response to his revelation had been overwhelming. Scientists from all over the world began collaborating on projects aimed at understanding interdimensional phenomena. Governments funded experiments to replicate Daniel's electromagnetic device, hoping to establish reliable communication with these mysterious entities. Universities introduced courses on quantum consciousness and metaphysics, fields once dismissed as fringe science. Even religious leaders weighed in, interpreting the findings through spiritual lenses, sparking discussions about faith, existence, and the afterlife. For Daniel, however, the personal cost of sharing his story lingered. Laura, his ex-wife, refused to speak to him after accusing him of exploiting Ethan's memory. Friends distanced themselves, unsure how to react to the media circus surrounding him. Strangers continued flooding his inbox with messages, some supportive, others hostile. Despite the chaos, Daniel found solace in knowing that Ethan's message had reached millions of people. His son's words echoed in his mind. They're here. One evening, as Daniel sat alone in his garage, he reflected on everything that had happened. The room was quiet except for the hum of his laptop and the occasional creak of the house settling. Papers covered every surface, detailing theories, experiments, and accounts from others who claimed to have encountered similar phenomena. Among them was a letter from Harold Jenkins thanking Daniel for having the courage to share what he'd seen. "You've opened a door none of us dared to touch," Harold wrote. "Now it's up to the rest of us to walk through it." Daniel sighed, leaning back in his chair. He had done everything he could think of to honor Ethan's legacy. Yet, despite all the advancements, he still felt incomplete. Was there something more he should be doing? Something left unsaid? As if answering his thoughts, Rachel Meyer walked into the garage carrying a folder. She looked tired but excited, her eyes bright with purpose. "I think we found something," she said, placing the folder on the table. "What is it?" Daniel asked, sitting up straighter. Rachel opened the folder and spread out several graphs and charts. "We've been analyzing data from multiple cases like yours. People who claim to have interacted with these entities. There's a pattern emerging. Certain frequencies seem to act as beacons. They don't just attract these beings, they create temporary bridges between dimensions." Daniel frowned. "So, you're saying we can control when and where these interactions happen?" "In theory, yes," Rachel replied. "But it's risky. We don't fully understand the consequences of opening these bridges. What if we attract something dangerous? Or worse, destabilize the fabric of reality?" Daniel nodded slowly. He understood the risks, but he also knew they couldn't stop now. Humanity had taken its first step toward understanding the unknown. Turning back wasn't an option. Over the next few weeks, Daniel and Rachel worked tirelessly to refine their original device. With help from researchers around the world, they developed a safer, more precise version capable of targeting specific frequencies. The goal was simple: establish controlled communication with the entities without causing harm. When the updated device was ready, they returned to Ethan's gravesite. This time, they came prepared, not just with technology, but with cameras, sensors, and a team of scientists eager to document the event. As they set up the equipment under the cover of darkness, Daniel felt a mix of excitement and dread. Would they see Ethan again? Or would they encounter something entirely different? Once everything was in place, they powered on the machine. Its low hum filled the air, growing louder as energy pulsed through its circuits. Lights flickered, casting eerie shadows across the cemetery. Everyone held their breath, waiting for something, anything, to happen. Minutes passed in tense silence. Then the ground beneath them trembled slightly, sending shock waves through the soles of their shoes. A low hum resonated in the air, vibrating in their chests. Suddenly, a figure materialized before them, a translucent shape glowing faintly, blue. It took a moment for Daniel to realize it was Ethan. Tears streamed down Daniel's face as he stared at his son. Ethan looked the same as before. Not quite solid, but unmistakably himself. His lips moved, forming words layered with echoes. "They're not bad," Ethan repeated, his voice resonating strangely. "They're just curious. They wanted to know about us, about life." "Where are you?" Daniel choked out. "Can you come back?" Ethan shook his head sadly. "I'm stuck between. I can't stay here forever. But Dad, listen, they're everywhere, watching, learning. We're not alone." Before Daniel could respond, Ethan began to fade, his form dissolving into shimmering particles that drifted upward like smoke. Within seconds, he was gone. The machine sputtered and died, plunging them back into silence. Daniel collapsed to his knees, overwhelmed by emotion. For the first time since Ethan's death, he felt a glimmer of peace, but also a profound sense of awe. Harold placed a comforting hand on Daniel's shoulder. "You did good," he said softly. "Now it's up to the rest of the world to decide what to do with this knowledge." As dawn broke over the horizon, Daniel knew their lives and perhaps humanity's understanding of existence would never be the same again. In the months that followed, Daniel continued working with Rachel and other researchers to explore the implications of their discovery. Though answers remained elusive, each new experiment brought them closer to unraveling the mysteries of the universe. For Daniel, the journey was no longer about finding closure. It was about embracing the infinite possibilities that lay ahead. Late one night, as he sat alone in his garage staring at the blank screen of his laptop, Daniel allowed himself a small smile. He didn't have all the answers, and maybe he never would. But one thing was certain. The search for truth was far from over, and for the first time in years he felt hopeful.